The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a new production from Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen. Compass is a program where we will take a look at some of the public issues facing our viewing area for Pioneer that includes the western Minnesota area and the eastern Dakotas and northwestern Iowa. This week on Compass, we're going to take a look at education, and specifically one part of it. That area is teacher shortages. There's a lot of discussion recently about how schools are having a difficult time finding teachers and how that can affect the schools and how that can affect students. A number of things come into the mix there, including things such as standardized tests or simply demographics. All of those things can play a role. How does it all work? Here's a look at a story from Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser.
Over the last few years, the nation, as well as our rural region schools, have noticed a teacher shortage, a lack in teacher retention. According to Chelsea Herrig, the National Education Association Student Program Chair, 1 in 3 teachers are actually leaving the profession within their first 5 years.
Our students need teachers who are in the classroom and who are dedicated to help the students. And so for our students to constantly see a turnover of teachers, it's not good. They see that as, was it something that we did as a class? Was it something that I am doing as a student?
But it's not always something the students did, or even the teachers. Sometimes it's the need to fill a position that forces the wrong candidate into the job.
What we're seeing is our teachers that are new to the profession, they go and they get a job because that might be the only opening, so they take it and they see, so you might be the second grade math teacher, but you also might be the special education teacher. And so it might not necessarily be the hiring process, but what teachers are already there that we can stretch thinner. There's been a lack of funding into our public schools, which then ultimately turns over to schools having to choose between whether or not they want to have another first grade teacher or if they want to cram students into the classroom that they already have. And when there's so many students in a class, that's what makes it tough to teach, because you have to have more one-on-one time to make sure that those students are understanding those concepts. There's less positions to hire for, and then there's also a lack in respect for the profession.
What society thinks the role of an educator is versus the reality of being an educator also seems to play a part in the short-lived dreams of being a teacher.
The reality is that we put in a lot more hours than people think. Until you've walked the life of a teacher, you don't know what it is that we do on a daily basis, and we spend our weekends preparing for the next week of lesson plans. We spend our summers learning the newest strategies and learning more professional development, preparing our classrooms. We spend holidays, catching up on grading, catching up on writing comments to make sure our students know that we appreciated the work that they did. Something as little as that, and people don't understand that the work we do is much more than we're paid, but at the same time, for those who have stayed in the profession long enough, they say that the rewards of being a teacher outweighs the fact that we have a low salary.
But that might not be the only deterrent.
Actually, what it is that our teachers that are new into the classroom, they need the supports that they need, and they're not getting that support that they need to be successful in their first year, and so they're leaving.
And they are making it publicly known why. So much so that this high turnaround rate makes it difficult to fill any position, but especially the positions of math, science, and special education region-wide.
They're tough positions to fill. They're a little bit more complicated than something that you're exposed to on everyday life, like reading or just speaking the language. In order for these shortages to stop, then we need to make sure that our governors, our elected officials are reinvesting in our public schools, and make sure that if there's a school district that needs more resources, that they have those resources so that our teachers are retained.
However, according to Loy Wolber, superintendent of the Walnut Grove School System, Rural area schools don't seem to be struggling as much with teacher shortages as their urban counterparts. They face a different challenge.
In the elementary level, we had a neighboring district that's twice the size of our district that had 5 applicants for elementary, and that's unheard of. When I was a youngster, we were 100 applicants easily, and so even the elementary is way down. But fortunately, you can teach grades K through 6 or grades 1 through 6, so you can grab from a couple teachers. The high school, the secondary, is much more limited because you have to find an art teacher or a family consumer science teacher or just a business teacher.
More and more rural schools are having to split their applicants between multiple subjects and even multiple buildings to keep the positions filled.
Can the ag teacher, you see ag teachers teaching a little bit more science. Science is very hard to find. Maybe outdoor living, our family consumer science, maybe the consumer skills will be taught by the social studies teacher or the health teacher, which it's just you're trying to get everybody fit in instead of trying to just cut it all out. But it is definitely a struggle, because if you've got to cut back on teachers, then all of a sudden in a small school, rural schools, we have neighboring schools that do not have family consumer science anymore. We have neighboring schools that have cut back elementary Spanish, including us. And so what do we pick and choose from? And so what happens is, well, we can't fill this area. Maybe we can't find a shop teacher. Well, should we just let it go then?
With applications down, schools are forced to advertise or get creative quick in filling their empty positions.
And that's what we're going to see more and more of, is schools with variances, community expert waivers, just trying to get some good people into the classrooms. We're trying to share staff, but if you're more than 10 miles apart, districts, then it's trying to get that teacher to drive, put them on the road, share their day is very difficult. Westbrook Walnut Grove and Heron Lake Okabena are sharing a family consumer science teacher. She's in Heron Lake Okabena first semester, and she's in Westbrook Walnut Grove second semester. That works out. Both schools win. A lot of ITV, you're going to see more and more of the television being used. We used it in the 90s all the time. But one of the things that many schools are doing in the rural areas are helping out with tuition, trying to get students, teachers to go into other fields to help with that, because a lot of times these single section schools, we do not need a full-time position. And so if people are willing to go out and get licensed in other areas, we, for one, as a district, will help them with that.
According to Wolber, retaining said teachers is an ongoing war between high standards for their teachers and high standards for their students.
So the test scores, the changing kids, it's very difficult because you're dealing with some really interesting families that have a lot of different things going on at home, and the teachers are trying to balance. I'm a teacher, but I'm kind of a social worker, but I'm kind of mom, a little bit of dad, and I'm not faulting the families. That's life. That's what we got, and we all have that in our families. You know, it's kind of a battle because we're trying to put higher standards on the teachers, so they have to turn out kids with higher test scores and higher this and higher that. I'm glad I graduated when I did, because I don't know if I would have, A, graduated from high school, and B, graduated from college with a teaching degree. What's saving us out here are teachers that graduate and want to come home. So they're trying to do some changes there, night classes, online classes, to get more of the people that, if you already love kids and you're already here, well then why not be a teacher?
With us now to talk about some of the issues involving the teacher shortage is Michelle Beach. Michelle is a professor at Southwest Minnesota State University. Michelle, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Tim, for having me.
So as we look at some of the issues around the teacher shortage in our viewing area, of course, you know, there are differences between rural areas and urban areas and suburban areas, and they're probably all affected differently by the teacher shortage. Tell us how you think it specifically affects some of the schools that you work with in southwestern Minnesota.
I think that the shortage is definitely exacerbated in the rural areas. The cities pays higher. There are more opportunities for second jobs or third jobs to accessorize students' income when they first graduate. and it seems like it's more glamorous. But the rural areas are really getting hit because areas that had 200 or 300 applicants just a few years ago per position now maybe have 12, 15, or none. Right after the first of the year, the State Department announced that there were still 250 classrooms in Minnesota that students were coming back to without teachers.
And so I know that there have been a number of ways that schools have tried to address this, or the educational institutions have tried to address this. I know you've talked when we were in the break there about Southwest State, where you are, and also Bemidji State. Tell us what some of the colleges are doing to try to address the rural teacher shortage.
One of the best ways to address the rural teacher shortage and deal with poverty is to be able to bring the programs to the students. For a single mom or dad with 3 or 4 children working 3 or 4 jobs, it's not possible to pick up roots really and go to a college town where you can get a 4-year degree. So what SMSU is doing is for our early childhood degree and early childhood special ed degrees, and that's birth through 3rd grade, is we're working with community colleges and technical colleges across the state. So students are able to get an AA or an AAS in child development in their area and then transfer to us online. We set up all their practices and all their in-school classroom times in their home district. So they're, again, from the standpoint of they know the area, they get to know the districts get to know them as well. So they have the opportunity, even place-bound, to be able to get to obtain a teaching degree.
So what you're talking about really is a non-traditional path, because we have this idea societally that people will go to college, get an elementary education degree or a secondary education degree, and then go into teaching, and it may be the first real job, let's say, that they ever have. But what you're talking about are often 2nd or 3rd career people who are in mid-career, a transition. It may have been an interest, but they didn't pursue it. So I think that the non-traditional path is really one that many people have set aside or not thought about until they look at a program like this, right?
Yes, especially those people who are already paras or already working for Head Start, already doing child care. They're already in the field, so to speak, but many of the non-trads that I work with they're the first people to have a high school degree from their family. Some most are the first to have a community college degree or a technical certificate, and definitely the first people in their families to graduate from the university.
Well, I know that when you look at patterns of people going to college, I remember looking at these statistics years ago, and it was pretty clear that one of the biggest barriers to people getting into higher education or getting a bachelor's degree, let's say, would be if they came from a family where no one in the family had gotten that degree before, whether it was teaching or in another field, right?
That is correct. It's not even in the quotient as far as thinking in terms of a future. And way back in high school, I remember people in my own class that I would say, where are you going to college? And they'd look at me funny and say, well, I need to go to work. I have a job at Lady of Mercy, or I have a job at the tech school. Back in those days, I grew up in Alexandria. Yeah.
And so what you're finding then, I'm sure, is that you have these people who, as you said, they're paraprofessionals, they're working in a district, they enjoy being with the kids in many cases, but perhaps it's just now in the last few years with the teacher shortages that they've started to become more aware of the idea that there would be a path for them to become a teacher and help address the teacher shortage, right?
Right. I think the teachers and the principals are also doing that. They're saying, Mary, you would be awesome as a teacher, whereas the thought had never occurred to them. And it just not been in their background in any capacity. And they're saying, wow, maybe I could do that, but I can't leave. I've got my 3 jobs and my 4 children here. And they say, oh, but there is a new program. And as the SMSU program is getting to be more and more known, then it does give them that access.
And we should say, for people who aren't familiar necessarily with SMSU, you've operated Marshall for many years, and so people, for you and Marshall, you'd be talking about people coming from a fairly large area, sparsely populated area, to get into the program, right?
Right. It's kind of interesting because I kind of kid around with my students saying that the only town in Minnesota, northern Iowa, western South Dakota, and even North Dakota, the only town in this whole area that I don't have students in is Marshall. And that's because those who are on campus or able to be on campus are on campus. Sure. This program is a distance program, and it is geared specifically towards non-traditional people. The people that, because they're place-bound, cannot come to another college for further education.
So when you talk with educators, for example, and you said a number of educators you've talked to are encouraging paraprofessionals or others to get into this program, this sounds like it targets really one specific area of the teacher shortages, as you said, the pre-K or K through 3 particularly. Is that an area where the teacher shortage is perhaps more acute or less acute than other areas of K-12?
No, I think the most acute is probably math and sciences at the high school level. And so what they've been trying there is they've tried what they call community experts. And community experts means you pull in someone who works at 3M, for instance, and is an actuary, and come in and teach the math class or the calculus class. Unfortunately, that hasn't worked very well. Like anything else, you know, it's like Tiger Woods makes that golfing look awfully easy, but you need two parts of it. You need the knowledge, but you also need to learn, or you need to know how to teach.
Sure.
And so the community experts, without that teaching piece, it's kind of not accomplishing as much as we'd like.
Yeah, and of course there would also be something of a work cultural shock from the work environment wherever they are, whereas where a paraprofessional has been in a classroom, or a paraprofessional, I think you had mentioned at one time when we were off camera, I know someone who had been a school cook, for example.
Yes.
They'd been around kids, they'd been working in a school environment, they were familiar with that, so the transition to a teaching career might be, in that sense anyway, easier for them.
Yes, I think so. They've already seen it, they're in it, they can visualize themselves doing it.
And then, of course, they've had the benefit of something like a student teaching experience in a way, because they're in a classroom with someone who's experienced.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah. What about in terms of there's the issue of how you get people into a teaching program, let's say, at an institution, because that's the logical path, whether it's a non-traditional student or a traditional student. But one of the other issues with the teacher shortage that maybe comes up from time to time is teacher retention and mentorship and those kinds of things. Are we seeing some changes there to try to help teachers who are in the profession stay in the profession? Is there much happening there?
We are very well aware of that problem. Is the retention rate is really not very good across the boards. Now, we like to think at SMSU that our retention rate is much higher because the students are in the field for every one of our methods classes, but there are other universities where they take very little, they have very few hours in the field before they student teach. They get into the degree, they get into the job, and they say, this isn't what I thought it was. So that's one problem with retention, but there have been a lot of wonderful different programs that are suited or are set up specifically so that an existing teacher is paired with that student, or new teacher, I should say. Even from like our college, where in the old days, if you graduated, bye-bye, we'll see you later. Now, I still hear from all kinds of students that have graduated all the way back. We really try to maintain that relationship so they have that support system.
Yeah, and that support system, I know I've heard a number of studies in the recent years where people say that made a difference for them when they were teaching, or that they felt that they had other people around them who were supportive, which is, of course, true in many professions. I know that there has been some national attention paid to this as well. I've seen over the last few weeks major national publications that have talked about the teacher shortages, and that it's not just a numbers, but it's also a type of shortage. And it's so help me understand, on a national basis, are there some significant differences state to state or nationally in where these differences are? I mean, rural and urban, I should say, that's one segment. What about nationally?
Nationally, it varies quite a bit. The bottom line is pay, is teacher pay. Like we talked about earlier, it's hard for someone who just loves chemistry to take a $30,000 job teaching chemistry rather than a $75,000 job working at an industry in a business. And so teacher pay makes a difference. The states who have higher teacher pay also have more competitiveness in the teaching field, and so that makes a difference. I do think that the expectations of the state make a difference. Minnesota is one of the few states in which when you student teach, you cannot work and you have no income, and what do you do for August through December, or January through May, either way? What do you do with half of a year with no income? That may suit young people who can live at home and mom and dad will help them, but that does not suit our non-trans.
The non-traditional students, because of course they may have financial obligations that a 22-year-old fresh out of college would not, right?
Right, that's correct.
Yeah. So as you look at some of these changes, I know I was looking for a while ago, for example, at a study in New York State that said New York State was in better shape than some other states because there was on average, a greater amount of compensation typically for teachers. As you look at other aspects that are facing the teacher shortages or retentions, of course, standards, tests, we've heard a lot about that. Tell us how that has affected teacher shortages.
I really think that it's especially affected teachers from the standpoint of retention. They go in excited and fired up, and I have to say the teachers that are going in nowadays with what we've learned in the last 10, 15 years on learning theory and how we learn and how students are engaged, the teachers that are going out there now are absolutely marvelous. They are so wonderful. But many of them go out and they are just gung-ho to do all these things, and instead they're being asked to teach the tests. They're focusing on the test. Maybe some of them, many schools have kind of eliminated even science in elementary school or social studies because the tests go on math and reading, and so that's very discouraging.
I think it's also affected some other areas. In addition to math and reading, you talked about some of those focus areas. I know there's been concern from folks in the arts community, I know, who are concerned about the impact on the arts and how those things have been affected by the test.
Good point. The other thing, too, is FIED. A lot of schools went through a transition about 5 years ago where they were looking for more time to teach the reading and more time to teach the math, so they took away recess and they took away the FIED. And, of course, the teachers then dealt with that in the classrooms because the little ones were, and big ones as far as that goes, were quite antsy. They weren't really terribly engaged. They needed that time off.
Sure. When you're working with some of these newer teachers, for example, or potential teachers, and you're working with experienced teachers, what are the experienced teachers telling some of the younger teachers or the people who are thinking about going into the profession? What is that dialogue like?
Well, that dialogue is not necessarily as good as we'd like it right now. I know one student in particular who just had all kinds of potential. He was a non-traditional student, and he came right up to student teaching and decided not to because of his mentor teacher saying the parents are hard, the kids are hard, administration, is under so much pressure they probably won't get your back. And so when it came to it and he got to the end, he said, okay, I have to support my family with no income for a whole half year for something that doesn't sound very appealing anymore. So not necessarily as highly endorsing as we would like right now because there are issues out in the schools.
Sure, and those are issues that you may run across in other professions as well. I know I was talking to someone a while ago, for example, in the nursing profession, who found that people who'd been in that profession were not necessarily as encouraging as other people in the business would like them to be about the reality of working in the profession. So that's one of the challenges that I expect you'll have to deal with, particularly. But with non-traditional students, again, if they have an interest in it or they've been a paraprofessional, those are the folks where you're seeing some of the success, yes, right, and really getting them into classrooms. Yes. What about when they get there? What's it like when you take these people who have not had a lot of experience, let's say, in teaching, but they suddenly get into it and they're helping to address the teacher shortage? Have you seen a retention rate or anything with those paraprofessionals who become teachers? What is it like for them when they're in the business?
They're passionate. They are unbelievably awesome. They've been around long enough. They have had children. They have been on the other side of it where they've been in the schools but yet not had their own classroom. They can't wait to get to their own classroom. And what I just see is just amazing teaching going on. The retention, my guess for my students at least, so it's an anecdotal spot here, but I don't know of any retention problems. Many years in a row, we've had 100% hiring rate anyway, which is awesome. But they get into those schools and they stay. They are so happy and grateful to find a passion and in most cases get out of poverty, have a nice middle class, respectable career, and make a difference in all those little ones in all their lives.
As I think about the people that you say have been able to help, address the issue of being a teacher shortage, becoming teachers themselves, one of the challenges in this is getting a handle on it to sort of quantify how big the problem is. We know it's in lots of areas. We know it's worse in some fields than others. But is there a way that you could describe it for the average person, say, well, this is how bad the teacher shortage is, or this is how much it's really changed? Is there a snapshot you could give us on that?
Well, there again, it depends somewhat on the state. I know both North Dakota and Minnesota, right after the first of the year, said, hey, anybody want to come out? If you're retired, come. We need you. We're missing. There are 250 classrooms in North Dakota, 350 in Minnesota, in which there are no teachers sitting in the classrooms for our students to come back to. So I think that the problem is acute. A couple of years ago, we knew it was coming, but it just suddenly seemed to hit all at once. Part of it is, well, a big share of it is the baby boom generations, but also districts are saying, you're making 85, I can hire somebody at 30, I'm going to offer early retirement, and suddenly you have a lot of people in a district that are gone. Moorhead's a good example, is they had several people take the early buyout, like many, and suddenly, whoa, when kindergarten came in, they were scrambling for kindergarten teachers.
Michelle, we just have a couple of minutes left here, but I'd just like to have you provide some advice for people who may be considering teaching, people who've thought about it. Your program is at Southwest State University in Marshall. How could they contact you to find out more about this? Just go to the Southwest State website?
Yep, go to the Southwest website and click on academics and on education. Go to distance learning program. They can also check any of the technical or community colleges in Alex, Wadena, Moorhead, Wilmer.
Because of the 2+2 programs where people will start there and then through articulation agreements then transfer into a 4-year program.
They
right?
do. So their classes transfer in, and we have an agreement to make sure that they do and they're taking the right things. And it works great. It was definitely a labor of love. It was very difficult to take a round peg and make it into a square hole, but it's worked. And a lot of the reason it's worked is because the students are just marvelous. They're just wonderful.
Great. Well, Michelle, I want you to thank you for coming in to be with us this week on Compass, and wish you the best of luck as you help to address the teacher shortage.
Okay, thanks so much.
That is all we have for this week on Compass. Be sure to tune into next week's Compass again at this same time on Pioneer Public Television, 12:30 on Sundays. And in the meantime, you can check out everything on our website, pioneer.org. If you have any suggestions for story ideas, send it to us here at Pioneer at yourtv@pioneer.org. I'm Les Heenan, and thank you for watching Compass on Pioneer Public Television.